The taxi driver crossed himself 3 times before he would even start the engine. "You sure about this, Kyria?" Dimitris asked, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel as he stared at the address I'd written on a scrap of paper. "The Villa Apatheia? Nobody goes there anymore." I adjusted my glasses and pulled my hair back into a practical ponytail, the way I always did when locals tried to spook me with their superstitions. After 12 years of archaeological work across Greece, I'd heard every ghost story, every curse, every warning about disturbing the past. "I'm sure," I said, settling into the cracked vinyl seat. "It's just an old house." Dimitris muttered something in Greek that I pretended not to understand, though my ears caught the words theos and hamartia, God and sin. He put the car in gear with the resignation of a man driving to his own funeral. "My name is Lena Markou, and I specialize in what academics politely call fringe archaeological sites, the places where history, mythology, and human delusion intersect." The Villa Apatheia had been purchased by the Greek Ministry of Culture after sitting abandoned for nearly a century. My job was simple: catalog whatever remained of the 19th century cult that had once operated there, determine if anything had historical value, and recommend whether the property should be demolished or preserved. The Circle of Apatheia, according to the sparse records I'd found in Thessaloniki's municipal archives, had been founded in 1847 by a wealthy German exile named Friedrich Clausen. They believed the Olympian gods weren't myths but psychological archetypes that could be summoned through ritualized transgression. Essentially, they thought you could become divine by perfecting your capacity for sin. Typical German romanticism meets Greek mysticism. I'd seen it before. The road wound up through olive groves and wild thyme, past stone walls that had stood since Byzantine times. Ancient Greece felt very close here, just 40 kilometers from the famous oracle at Delphi. Tourists came seeking wisdom from the past. I came seeking paychecks and publication opportunities. "There," Dimitris said, pointing through the dusty windshield. The Villa Apatheia perched on a hillside like a pale scar against the green landscape. It was smaller than I'd expected, 3 stories of neoclassical pretension with Doric columns flanking a grand entrance and tall windows that stared down at us like empty eye sockets. The white marble was stained with decades of weather and neglect, giving the building a diseased appearance. But it was beautiful in the way that decay can be beautiful. Someone had loved this place once, had poured money and dreams into making it a temple worthy of forgotten gods. Dimitris pulled into the circular drive and cut the engine. The silence was immediate and total. No birds, no insects, no wind through the olive trees. Just the ticking of the cooling engine and my own breathing. "I'll be back tomorrow at sunset," he said, not looking at the house. "If you're not waiting by the road, I'll know to tell the police." "That's very dramatic, even for a Greek," I said, counting out drachmas for the fare. "It's just a house, Dimitris. Stone and mortar, and probably some very nice antiques." He shook his head and crossed himself again. "The stones remember, Kyria. They remember everything." After he drove away, I stood alone in the circular drive, my duffel bag at my feet and my equipment cases stacked beside a crumbling fountain. The house watched me with those hollow windows. A few were boarded up, but most simply stared, their glass long since shattered by storms or stones. I'd stayed in worse places. During my graduate work, I'd slept in Byzantine crypts, Roman ruins, and once, memorably, in a cave on Crete that the locals insisted was haunted by the ghost of a Minoan bull dancer. I was 31 years old, unmarried by choice, and had learned to find comfort in solitude in the company of the dead. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning, but I was tired from the journey and annoyed by Dimitris's superstitions. I pushed open the heavy oak door, shouldered my bags, and stepped into the Villa Apatheia. The entrance hall was magnificent, even in decay. A double staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, its marble steps worn smooth by generations of feet. Faded frescoes decorated the walls, scenes from Greek mythology rendered in the overwrought style of the 1800s. I recognized Prometheus stealing fire, Pandora opening her box, Icarus falling from the sky, all stories about humans who reached too far and paid the price. My footsteps echoed as I walked deeper into the house, my archaeological eye cataloging details, the quality of the marble pentelic, probably quarried from the same source as the Parthenon. The style of the frescoes German neoclassical with obvious influence from the Nazarene movement. The layout of the rooms designed for ceremony rather than comfort. I found a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 1920s, bedrooms with beds still made up in rotting linens, a library whose books had long since been devoured by insects and damp. Everything was covered in dust and the detritus of abandonment, mouse droppings, broken glass, fragments of plaster that crunched under my boots. But it was in the basement that I found what I'd come for. The stairs down were hidden behind a door in the kitchen pantry. They led to a circular room carved directly from the living rock of the hillside, its walls covered in symbols I recognized from my graduate. Work on mystery religions, the caduceus of Hermes, the thyrsus of Dionysus, the owl of Athena, the lightning bolt of Zeus. 7 doors led off from the central chamber, each sealed with a different symbol painted in what looked like dried blood. A mirror, a golden coin, a crimson veil, an emerald serpent, a goblet, a spear, a bed of moss. Above each door, carved into the stone lintel, were words in ancient Greek. Hybris, pride pleonexia, greed epithymia, lust phonos, envy gastrimargia, gluttony orge, wrath acedia, sloth. The 7 deadly sins, translated into the language of Aristotle and Plato. But these weren't Christian concepts. They were older, deeper. The Greeks had understood these as fundamental flaws in human nature, the weaknesses that brought down heroes and destroyed cities. I set up my camera and began documenting everything, working by the light of my battery-powered floods. Each door was made of different wood: olive, oak, cedar, pine, walnut, ash, and what looked like cypress. The metalwork was exquisite, clearly hand-forged by masters. Someone had spent a fortune creating this place. It was past midnight when I finished the initial survey. I was exhausted, hungry, and covered in dust. I climbed back up to the main house, found a bedroom that seemed relatively clean, and rolled out my sleeping bag on the bare mattress. That's when I heard the first voice. It was my own voice, echoing up from the basement, speaking words I'd never said. The sin is not the danger, the acceptance is. I lay in the darkness, listening to myself repeat those words over and over, until finally exhaustion won, and I fell into dreams of marble gods with bleeding eyes. I woke to sunlight streaming through broken shutters and the smell of wild thyme drifting through the house. For a moment, I felt almost peaceful, until I remembered the voice I'd heard in the night. My own voice, speaking from the basement. I convinced myself it had been a dream, or perhaps an echo caused by the unusual acoustics of the circular chamber. Old buildings were full of strange sounds. I'd learned not to trust my senses in places where the past pressed so heavily against the present. After a breakfast of trail mix and bottled water, I returned to the basement with my equipment. I wanted to examine those doors more closely, to see if any of them could be opened without causing damage. The first door, marked with a mirror symbol and the word hybris, had no visible lock. When I pressed against it, it swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The room beyond was small and circular, lit by a skylight that shouldn't have been possible this far underground. But there it was, letting in a shaft of golden morning light that illuminated the room's single furnishing, a mirror. It was beautiful, a standing mirror in a silver frame, the glass so perfect it seemed to drink in light and give back something more luminous. I could see myself reflected in it, but something was wrong with the image. The woman in the mirror looked like me, but better. Her hair was glossy and perfectly styled instead of practical and pulled back. Her clothes were elegant rather than functional. Her skin was flawless, her posture confident, her expression serene with the knowledge of her own superiority. "Hello, Lena," the reflection said. I stumbled backward, my rational mind rejecting what I was seeing. Mirrors didn't speak. Reflections were just bounced light, physics, nothing more. "Don't be afraid," my reflection continued, her voice exactly like mine, but somehow more cultured, more refined. "I'm you, but perfected. I'm everything you could be if you weren't so determined to hide your light under a bushel of academic modesty." "This isn't real," I said aloud, the words echoing in the small space. "Isn't it?" The reflection smiled, and I realized I wasn't smiling. "Look at yourself, Lena. Really look." When was the last time you bought yourself something beautiful? When did you last allow yourself to be admired? You're brilliant, accomplished, attractive, and you dress like a graduate student and hide in dusty ruins because you're afraid of being seen. I wanted to leave, to close the door and pretend I'd never opened it, but the reflection was speaking truths I'd spent years avoiding. You could have been department head by now, she continued. You could have written the definitive book on Hellenic mystery religions. You could have had that fellowship at Oxford, could have married Andreas when he asked, could have been living a life instead of just studying other people's lives. Andreas. I hadn't thought about him in months. My colleague from the University of Athens who proposed 3 years ago. I turned him down because I wasn't ready, because I wanted to focus on my career, because I was afraid of failing at love the way I seemed to fail at everything that mattered. You're afraid, the reflection said, reading my thoughts. Afraid of your own potential. Afraid that if you really tried, really reached for what you want, you might not be good enough. So you stay small, you stay safe, you stay invisible. That's not true, I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You're 31 years old, Lena. How much longer are you going to wait for your life to begin? The reflection stepped closer to the glass, and I found myself stepping closer too, drawn by her confidence, her certainty, her beautiful, terrible rightness. I can show you, she said. I can show you what you're capable of. All you have to do is stop hiding. Her hand pressed against the glass from her side. Almost without thinking, I raised mine to match it. Our palms met with only the mirror between us, and I felt a shock of recognition, not just of her face, but of herself. This was who I'd always wanted to be. That's it, she breathed. Accept who you really are. The glass began to warm under my palm. The boundary between us seemed to thin. I could feel her confidence flowing into me, her certainty, her magnificent self-regard. I was brilliant. I was beautiful. I was meant for great things. I was better than everyone else, and it was time the world acknowledged it. The thought was so seductive, so right, that it took me a moment to recognize it for what it was, the first whisper of hubris, the pride that had brought down Icarus and Narcissus and every hero who'd ever thought themselves equal to the gods. I jerked my hand back from the mirror. No, I said, backing toward the door. This isn't wisdom. This is vanity. The reflection's face twisted with anger. You coward. You'll die in obscurity because you're too afraid to claim what's yours. I fumbled for the door handle, not taking my eyes off the mirror. The reflection was pounding against the glass now, her face contorted with rage and desperation. You'll never be happy, she screamed. You'll never be great. You'll die forgotten. I slammed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Through the wood I could hear the sound of breaking glass, but when I opened the door a crack to look, the mirror stood intact and the room was empty. No reflection at all. Back in the central chamber I made careful notes in my journal. Room I contained significant psychological disturbance, possible hallucinogenic properties in the air or light. Mirror may have been designed to trigger narcissistic episodes. Recommend sealing immediately. But even as I wrote, I could feel the seeds the reflection had planted taking root. She'd been right about some things. I had played it safe. I had hidden my abilities. Maybe it was time to... No. I closed the journal with a snap. That way lay madness. But as I worked to document the other doors, I found myself checking my reflection in every surface. The brass fittings, the polished stone, even the screen of my digital camera. And every time, I was disappointed by what I saw. Just Lena plain. Practical, forgettable Lena. The woman in the mirror had been so much more. By afternoon I'd photographed and measured all 7 doors, but I couldn't get the mirror out of my head. Every shadow seemed to hold the possibility of my perfected reflection. Every gleaming surface promised a glimpse of who I could become. I caught myself checking my hair in my camera's LCD screen for the 4th time and forced myself to focus. This was exactly what the room had been designed to do. To plant the seed of vanity and let it grow. The circle of apatheia had understood human psychology better than I'd given them credit for. The second door bore the symbol of a golden coin and the word pleonexia carved into its lintel, greed. This one would probably contain treasure of some kind, designed to trigger acquisitive desires. I'd seen similar setups in Roman mystery cult sites, chambers filled with fool's gold or paste jewelry to test initiates' material attachments. This door was heavier than the first, made of dark walnut with brass fittings green with age. It opened with a creak that echoed through the chamber like a sigh. The room beyond was larger than the mirror chamber, rectangular rather than circular, with the same impossible skylight casting warm illumination. But where the first room had been sparse, this one was opulent beyond imagination. Gold coins covered the floor ankle-deep, gleaming like fallen stars. They weren't ancient. These were modern currencies from around the world, gold sovereigns and Krugerrands and American eagles, all genuine and all perfect. The walls were lined with shelves holding artifacts that made my archaeologist's heart race: Byzantine manuscripts, classical sculptures, Egyptian jewelry, Viking arm rings, Mayan jade masks. In the center of the room stood a pedestal holding a single golden coin, larger than the others and marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I watched, a new coin materialized in the air above my head and fell with a soft clink to join the others on the floor. Then another, and another. I knelt and picked up one of the coins, a British sovereign that felt warm and substantial in my palm. It was real. I was sure of it. I'd handled enough genuine artifacts to recognize the weight and feel of true gold. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind me. I spun around to find a man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. He was middle-aged, distinguished, with silver hair, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. I'd never seen him before, but somehow I knew who he was. "Dr. Markou," he said, stepping into the room. "I'm pleased to finally meet you. I followed your career with great interest." "Who are you?" I demanded, though part of me already knew the answer. "I'm the person who's been waiting for someone like you," he said. "Someone with your talents, your expertise, your potential. My name is Christos Stavros." The name hit me like a physical blow. Christos Stavros was one of the wealthiest men in Greece, a shipping magnate and collector who'd been rumored to have connections to the black market antiquities trade. He was also known for his lavish patronage of archaeological projects, and for his habit of claiming ownership of anything his money helped discover. "You're not real," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "This is like the mirror. It's showing me what I want to see." Stavros smiled and picked up a handful of coins, letting them trickle through his fingers like water. "Does it matter? Real or not, the offer stands. All of this could be yours, Lena. Enough money to fund any excavation, any research project, any dream you've ever had." More coins were falling from the ceiling now, a gentle rain of gold that chimed like bells as it hit the floor. The sound was mesmerizing. "You've spent your whole career begging for grants," Stavros continued, "scraping together funding, compromising your vision, accepting second-rate positions because you lack the resources to demand better. What could you accomplish if money were never an obstacle again?" I thought of all the sites I'd wanted to excavate but couldn't afford to touch. The Minoan palace on Crete that was slowly being destroyed by erosion. The Roman villa near Athens that was going to be bulldozed for a shopping center. The Byzantine monastery in the mountains where locals claimed to have found golden icons. "I could save them," I whispered. "You could save them all," Stavros agreed. "One coin at a time. Each one you take gives you the resources to do more good, to preserve more history, to achieve more greatness." He gestured to the shelves around us. "And think of what you could learn. Manuscripts that scholars have dreamed of reading, artifacts that could rewrite history, all waiting for someone with the wisdom to claim them." I looked around the room with new eyes. The treasures weren't just valuable, they were important. That Byzantine codex might contain lost works of classical literature. That Maya mask could revolutionize our understanding of pre-Columbian art. That Egyptian necklace might have belonged to Cleopatra herself. "Just one coin," Stavros said softly, "to start, to see what becomes possible." I bent down and picked up a gold eagle, feeling its weight in my palm. It was warm, as if it had been lying in sunlight. With this single coin I could buy equipment, hire assistants, begin the work that mattered. As I lifted it, I heard a sound like a distant scream. "What was that?" I asked. Stavros shrugged. "Nothing important. Supply and demand, my dear. When you gain something, someone else must lose it. That's simply economics." The scream came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a child. "Who's screaming?" I demanded. "Does it matter?" Stavros's smile became colder. Somewhere in the world, a child goes hungry so that gold can be mined. Somewhere, a family loses their home so that a corporation can profit. Somewhere, someone suffers so that someone else can prosper. That's the way the world works, Lena. The only question is whether you're going to be the one who suffers or the one who prospers. I looked at the coin in my hand, and for a moment I could see through it like a window. On the other side was a small apartment where a family sat around an empty table. The father held a termination notice. The mother counted coins that weren't enough. The children asked why there was no dinner. "This is their money?" I whispered. "This is your money," Stavros corrected, "the moment you choose to take it. Everything has a cost, Lena. The question is whether you're willing to let someone else pay it." More coins were falling, faster now, and with each one I heard another scream, another sob, another cry for help. I saw families evicted from their homes, workers fired from their jobs, patients denied medical care they couldn't afford, all so that gold could flow to those willing to reach out and take it. "I can't," I said, dropping the coin. It fell to the floor with a sound like breaking glass. "Then you'll die poor," Stavros said, his form already beginning to fade, "and all the history you could have saved will die with you." The rain of gold stopped. The room began to dim, but I could still hear the echoes of those screams, and I knew that somewhere in the world families were safe because I hadn't taken what wasn't mine. I stumbled back to the door, looking over my shoulder at the treasures I was leaving behind. The rational part of my mind knew they weren't real, couldn't be real, but my hands shook with the knowledge of what I was giving up. Back in the central chamber, I wrote in my journal, "Room 2 contains sophisticated psychological manipulation focused on material desires, auditory and visual hallucinations. Possible connection to remote viewing or precognitive awareness? Recommend immediate sealing." But as I wrote, I couldn't stop thinking about that Byzantine manuscript, about all the knowledge it might contain, all the good I could do with unlimited resources, all the problems a little bit of gold could solve. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection of my perfect self or heard the gentle chime of falling gold. The house seemed to breathe around me, settling into itself with creaks and sighs that sounded almost like whispers. I gave up trying to rest around 3 in the morning and made myself coffee on my camp stove, sitting by the kitchen window and watching the stars wheel overhead. The silence was so complete it seemed to have weight, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. That's when I heard the music. It was faint at first, drifting up from the basement, a melody that seemed familiar even though I was certain I'd never heard it before, something between a lullaby and a love song, played on instruments I couldn't identify. As I listened, I felt a pull in my chest, a longing for something I couldn't name. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound downstairs. The third door stood slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd left it closed. The symbol carved above it was a crimson veil, and the word beneath read epithymia, lust, desire, the hunger for what we cannot or should not have. The music was coming from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room unlike any I'd ever seen. The walls were draped in rich fabrics, silk and velvet and deep reds and purples, all soft textures that invited touch. Candles flickered in sconces, casting warm light that seemed to caress every surface. The air smelled of jasmine and sandalwood and something else, something primal that made my pulse quicken. In the center of the room was a bed covered in rose petals, and beside it stood a figure with its back to me. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said without turning around. The voice was warm, perfectly pitched to send shivers down my spine. "I've been waiting so long." The figure turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It had no face, just smooth skin where features should be, but somehow I knew it was beautiful, more than beautiful. It was everything I had ever desired in another person, shaped by my deepest longings into perfect form. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm whoever you need me to be," it said, moving closer. "I'm the love you never found, the passion you never experienced, the connection you've been searching for your whole life." As it spoke, features began to emerge from the blank canvas of its face, eyes the color of deep water, a mouth that promised secrets and salvation, hands that looked as if they knew exactly how to touch me. "I don't understand," I said, backing toward the door. "You've been alone so long," it murmured, and now its voice had taken on the cadence of every lover I'd ever imagined. Devoted to your work, dedicated to the past, but what about now? What about you? When did you last allow yourself to be loved? The answer was, never. Not really. I'd had relationships, but they'd always been secondary to my career, my research, my carefully constructed independence. I'd told myself it was a choice, that I preferred solitude to compromise. But here, in this room that smelled of desire and promise, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I can be anyone, the figure continued, its form shifting subtly. Andreas, if you want, the way he looked at you before you broke his heart, or perhaps someone new, someone who understands you completely. The face settled into features that were heartbreakingly familiar, Andreas as he'd been 3 years ago, before I'd refused his proposal and watched the light die in his eyes. But perfected somehow, idealized, everything I'd loved about him without any of the flaws that had made me hesitate. Lena, it said in Andreas's voice, and I felt my knees go weak. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping you'd change your mind. You're not real, I said, but I was moving closer despite myself. Andreas is in Athens. He's probably married by now. Does it matter? Not. Andreas smiled, and it was exactly the way he used to smile when he thought I wasn't looking. Real, imagined, remembered, dreamed. What's the difference when the feeling is true? It, reached out and touched my face with fingers that felt exactly like Andreas's. I closed my eyes and leaned into the touch, starving for the connection I'd denied myself for so long. I can give you everything, it whispered. Every love you've ever wanted, every passion you've ever dreamed of, all the romance you've read about but never experienced, all the desire you've suppressed in the name of academic propriety. The room began to change around us. The candles multiplied, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The bed expanded, becoming a sea of silk and softness. The air grew thick with the scent of roses and the sound of distant music, a symphony of longing made manifest. All you have to do is let go, not Andreas murmured against my ear. Stop thinking, stop analyzing, stop being afraid, just feel. His hands were in my hair now, and I could feel myself dissolving into the sensation. This was what I'd always wanted, to be cherished, desired, understood completely. To stop being the careful academic and become just a woman, loved and loving without reservation. That's it, he breathed. Give me your memories, and I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of. My memories? The words broke through the haze of desire like a splash of cold water. The lonely ones, it said, and now its voice was less certain. The ones that hurt, the rejections, the disappointments, the nights you cried yourself to sleep. I can take them all away and replace them with love. I thought of my memories, the loneliness, yes, but also the triumph of my first published paper, the joy of discovering an intact Byzantine mosaic, the satisfaction of solving a 1,000-year-old puzzle through patient research. The pain was part of me, but so was everything I'd built from that pain. If you take my memories, I said slowly, what's left? Only love, it promised. Only pleasure. Only the best of everything you've ever wanted. But that wouldn't be me anymore. That would be someone else entirely, someone who'd never struggled, never grown, never earned her joy through suffering. A perfect lover for a perfect man in a perfect room, but empty of everything that made me who I was. No, I said, stepping back. I won't trade myself for paradise. The figure's face contorted with rage, and for a moment I saw what lay beneath the beautiful mask, something hungry and desperate and utterly alien. You'll die alone, it snarled, its voice no longer Andreas's but something else entirely. Unloved and unmourned, you'll have your precious memories and there'll be cold comfort in an empty bed. Maybe that was true. Maybe I would die alone with only my work and my stubborn independence for company. But I'd die as myself, not as some hollowed-out shell of romantic fantasy. I stumbled back to the door, slamming it behind me as the thing that had worn Andreas's face shrieked its fury. In the central chamber, I leaned against the cool stone and tried to calm my racing heart. 3 rooms down, 4 to go. In my journal, I wrote, Room 3 contains extreme psychological manipulation targeting romantic and sexual desires. Subject experiences vivid hallucinations of idealized partners. Recommend immediate psychological evaluation for anyone exposed. But even as I wrote, I could still smell jasmine and sandalwood, could still feel the ghost touch of not Andreas's fingers on my face, and I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Outside, dawn was breaking over the hills of Delphi, but in the depths of the Villa Apatheia, the night seemed eternal. I spent the morning above ground, documenting the frescoes and trying to shake off the lingering effects of the third room. But the house seemed to be waking up around me, becoming more present and aware with each door I opened. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision. Whispers echoed from empty rooms. The faces in the painted myths seemed to watch me with knowing eyes. By afternoon, I couldn't avoid the basement any longer. I had a job to do, and 3 rooms still remained unexplored. The 4th door bore the symbol of an emerald serpent and the word Phthonos, envy. This door was different from the others. Instead of wood, it was made of polished metal that reflected my face in a dozen fragmented pieces. Each reflection showed a different expression: anger, resentment, bitter satisfaction. I looked like a stranger to myself. The door opened at my touch, revealing a room that was uncomfortably familiar. It was my apartment in Thessaloniki, recreated in perfect detail down to the stack of unread academic journals on my coffee table and the wilted plant I'd forgotten to water before leaving. But everything was wrong somehow, tainted with an atmosphere of malice and decay. Sitting at my desk, reading from a leather-bound book, was my best friend from university. Sophia Costas looked exactly as she had when we'd shared that tiny apartment as graduate students, all dark curls and bright eyes and infectious laughter. She'd been the brilliant one, the one everyone said would revolutionize Byzantine studies, the one who'd gotten the fellowship at Oxford that I'd dreamed of. She looked up as I entered, and her smile was cold as winter morning. "Lena," she said. "Perfect timing. I was just reading some of your old diary entries." My blood went cold. "What diary?" She held up the book, and I recognized it. The journal I'd kept during our final year at university, filled with all my private thoughts and fears and bitter jealousies. I'd lost it when we moved out of our shared apartment, had assumed it was thrown away. "Oh, there are some wonderful passages in here," Sophia continued, flipping through pages. "Listen to this one. Sophia gave her presentation today on iconoclasm. Everyone loved it, of course. They always love her work. Sometimes I wonder if she's really that brilliant, or if she's just better at playing the game, better at charming professors and making connections and saying the right things at the right times." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I was young. I was frustrated. "Oh, it gets better," Sophia interrupted. "She acts like my friend, but I see the way she looks at me sometimes, like she pities me. Poor little Lena with her second-rate ideas and her social awkwardness. She probably laughs about me with her new Oxford friends." "That's not... I didn't mean... Didn't you?" Sophia's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "But here's my favorite part. I hate her sometimes. I hate how easy everything is for her, how naturally success comes. I hate that she's everything I want to be and will never be. Sometimes I hope she fails just so I can feel superior for once." The words hit me like physical blows because they were true. I had written them, had felt them, had spent sleepless nights consumed with envy for everything Sophia seemed to have that I lacked. The shame of those feelings had eaten at me for years. "You never understood," Sophia said, closing the journal, "how hard it was for me, how much I struggled." "Struggled?" I laughed bitterly. "You got the Oxford Fellowship. You published 3 papers in our final year. You had professors fighting over you." "Because I worked twice as hard as everyone else," Sophia snapped, her composure cracking. "Because I spent every night in the library while you were sleeping. Because I sacrificed everything, friendships, relationships, my own peace of mind, to achieve what looked so effortless to you." She stood up, moving around the desk to face me. "Do you know what you had that I envied? You had talent that came naturally. You had insights that I had to struggle for. You could look at a fragment of pottery and immediately see the story it told, while I had to spend hours researching and analyzing to reach the same conclusions." Her face was twisted with years of suppressed resentment. "You think I didn't know how you felt about me? You think I couldn't see the envy in your eyes every time I succeeded? It poisoned our friendship, Lena. Your jealousy made every achievement feel hollow." "That's not true," I protested, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. My envy had poisoned things between us. After she left for Oxford, We'd gradually lost touch, and I'd told myself it was because we were both busy. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to hear about her successes when my own career felt so mediocre in comparison. Look around you, Sophia gestured to the recreated apartment. This is what your envy created, a perfect replica of our life together, but infected with all the resentment and bitterness you never had the courage to voice. You turned our friendship into a competition I never wanted to participate in. The room began to change around us. The walls grew stained and moldy. The books on the shelves turned to ash. The windows showed not the street outside our old apartment, but a gray wasteland where nothing grew. This is what envy does, Sophia said, her voice becoming distant and echoing. It rots everything it touches. It turns love into hatred, friendship into rivalry, admiration into resentment.
You could have been happy for me, Lena.
You could have celebrated my successes, and I could have celebrated yours. Instead, you chose to nurture poison in your heart. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the evidence was all around me. My own words, written in my own hand, documenting years of petty jealousy and bitter resentment. The friendship that could have sustained us both, destroyed by my inability to find joy in someone else's happiness. I was wrong, I whispered. I was young and stupid and wrong. Were you? Sophia's smile was sharp as broken glass. Or were you just honest? At least here in this room you can stop pretending. You can embrace what you really are, someone who measures their worth by other people's failures. She held out the journal. Take it. Read every bitter word you wrote. Remember every moment of envy, every flash of schadenfreude when someone else stumbled. Stop pretending to be noble and accept what you really are. I looked at the journal, at my own handwriting documenting the worst parts of my nature. It would be so easy to take it, to stop fighting against the ugliness inside me and just accept that I was petty and jealous and small. But I thought of Sophia as she really was, not this twisted reflection of my own insecurities, but the brilliant, kind woman who had tried to be my friend despite my failings. She had deserved better from me. We both had deserved better. No, I said, backing away from the journal. I was wrong then, and I'm wrong now. Envy isn't honesty. It's a choice to focus on what others have instead of what I can build for myself. The false Sophia's face contorted with rage. You'll always be second best, always living in someone else's shadow. You'll die knowing you were never enough. Maybe that was true. Maybe I would always struggle with envy, always fight the voice that whispered I wasn't good enough, smart enough, successful enough. But I could choose not to let that voice control me. I could choose to celebrate others' victories instead of resenting them. I turned my back on the false Sophia and walked out of the rotting apartment, slamming the door behind me. In the central chamber, I leaned against the cool stone and tried to process what I'd experienced. 4 rooms down, 3 to go. But I was beginning to understand the true horror of this place. It wasn't showing me monsters. It was showing me myself, all the ugly, petty, broken parts of my nature that I'd spent my life trying to hide or overcome. The circle of apatheia hadn't built rooms to house sins. They'd built mirrors to reflect the sins that already lived inside us all. In my journal I wrote, Room IV exploits feelings of inadequacy and competitive resentment. Subject confronts documented evidence of their own envious thoughts and behaviors. Psychological impact severe. Recommend counseling for anyone exposed. But even as I wrote, I could hear Sophia's voice echoing in my memory, listing all my failures and inadequacies. And despite everything I'd learned, part of me wondered if she was right. The sun was setting by the time I gathered the courage to approach the 5th door. My hand shook as I photographed the symbol carved above it, a goblet overflowing with what looked like wine but gleamed too darkly in the artificial light. The word beneath read gastrimargia, gluttony, but not just for food. The ancient Greeks had understood this as the hunger that could never be satisfied, the need to consume everything in reach until nothing remained. I hadn't eaten since morning, too disturbed by the previous rooms to think about food. Now my stomach cramped with hunger, and the smell drifting from beneath the door made my mouth water. It was everything I loved: fresh bread, roasted meat, chocolate, wine, all the comfort foods I denied myself in the name of discipline and health. The door opened easily, revealing a dining room that belonged in a palace. A massive table stretched the length of the space, groaning under the weight of an impossible feast. There were dishes from every culture and every time period, Ancient Greek symposium foods, Roman delicacies, Byzantine honey cakes, modern French cuisine, traditional Greek dishes that reminded me of my grandmother's cooking. At the head of the table sat a figure I recognized from old family photographs, my yaya, my grandmother, who had died when I was 12. She looked exactly as I remembered her, small and round, with silver hair pulled back in a bun, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and love. Agapi mu, she said, using the endearment she'd always called me. My love, you're so thin. Come, sit, eat. I've made all your favorites. I knew it wasn't real. I knew this was another trap, another mirror reflecting my own desires back at me. But the smell of her cooking, moussaka and dolmades and the honey cookies she used to make for Christmas, hit me like a physical force. I'm not hungry, I lied. Yaya clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Not hungry? Look at you, skin and bones. You work too hard, worry too much. Food is love, Kuritsimu. It's comfort and connection and joy. Why do you deny yourself these simple pleasures? She was right, in a way. I had always had a complicated relationship with food, with pleasure, with anything that felt indulgent. After Yaya died, I'd thrown myself into studies, into discipline, into the kind of self-denial that felt like virtue but was really just another form of control. Just a little, Yaya said, patting the chair beside her. Just taste, to remember. I found myself walking toward the table, drawn by smells that triggered memories of childhood summers, of feeling loved and safe and fed. The food was beautiful, perfectly prepared, artfully presented, everything glistening with oils and sauces that made my empty stomach clench with need. I sat down beside my grandmother's familiar warmth and picked up a piece of bread. It was still warm from the oven, the crust crackling as I broke it. The taste was perfect, everything bread should be, everything I'd ever wanted bread to be. That's it, Yaya smiled. Now try the dolmades, made with lamb, the way you like them. The stuffed grape leaves were tender and fragrant, bursting with flavor that seemed to expand in my mouth. I had forgotten how good food could taste, how much pleasure it could bring. Why had I been denying myself this? More, Yaya encouraged, piling my plate high. Try the pastizio, and the souvlaki, and this chocolate cake. I made it just for you. I ate, and with each bite, the hunger grew instead of diminishing. The food was so good, so satisfying that I couldn't stop. Every dish was better than the last, every flavor more intense. I tried the roasted lamb, the fresh seafood, the rich desserts that melted on my tongue like dreams made edible. Hungry, aren't you? Yaya said, but her voice had changed somehow, become colder. You've been starving yourself for so long, denying every pleasure, every comfort. No wonder you're so miserable. I looked down and realized I had consumed an enormous amount of food. Plates and bowls lay empty around me, and yet I was still hungry. Not just hungry, ravenous. The food had awakened something bottomless inside me, a need that grew with every bite. This is what you've been missing, Yaya continued. But when I looked at her, her kind face had changed. Her eyes were too bright, her smile too wide. All those years of careful portions and healthy choices and disciplined self-denial. For what? To be thin? To be virtuous? To prove you're better than people who actually enjoy their lives? I reached for more food, a rich chocolate tart that looked like pure indulgence, but as I lifted it to my mouth I noticed something wrong. The tart was moving, writhing, as if something lived inside it. When I looked closer I could see it was full of worms, fat and white and squirming. Eat it, Yaya commanded, and her voice was no longer warm. You're so hungry, aren't you? So empty inside. Fill yourself up, take everything you want. I looked around the table with new eyes and saw that all the food was corrupted. The bread was moldy, the meat was rotting, the wine had turned to vinegar. But I was still hungry, still craving more, even as my rational mind recoiled from what I was seeing. This is what gluttony really is, Yaya said, her form beginning to shift and blur. Not just eating too much, needing too much, taking more than you deserve, more than you need, until there's nothing left for anyone else. The room around us changed. The elegant dining room became a wasteland, the tables stretching to infinity, covered with the remains of consumed civilizations. I saw forests devoured for farmland, oceans emptied of fish, mountains strip-mined for minerals, all to feed the endless hunger of creatures who could never have enough. You're one of us now, Yaya whispered, but she was no longer my grandmother. She was something else, something hollow and eternally starving. You've tasted the hunger. You'll never be satisfied again. You'll consume and consume and consume until there's nothing left but emptiness. I could feel it happening. The transformation, the awakening of something bottomless inside me. I was still hungry despite having eaten more than I ever had in my life. I wanted more food, more pleasure, more of everything the world had to offer. I wanted to take and take and take until I was full, even if it meant leaving nothing for anyone else. But as I reached for another piece of corrupted food, I remembered something Yaya had really said to me years ago when I was a child stealing cookies from her kitchen. "Little one, the sweetest food turns bitter if you take more than you need." This wasn't my grandmother. My real Yaya had taught me about moderation, about gratitude, about sharing what you had with others. She would never encourage the kind of mindless consumption I'd just indulged in. I pushed back from the table, forcing myself to stop eating despite the hunger clawing at my insides. "No," I said, "this isn't nourishment, this is addiction." The false Yaya hissed with rage, her form dissolving into something monstrous and starving. "You'll never be satisfied. You'll spend your life hungry and wanting and denying yourself every pleasure." Maybe that was true. Maybe I would always struggle with the balance between need and want, between nourishment and indulgence. But I could choose not to let hunger control me, not to take more than I needed at the expense of others. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. In the central chamber, I knelt on the cool stone floor and tried not to vomit. The food I'd eaten sat heavy in my stomach, but the hunger remained, not for food now, but for something else, something more. 5 rooms down, 2 to go. In my journal, I wrote, "Room V triggers compulsive consumption behaviors. Subject experiences intense hunger that increases rather than decreases with feeding. Food appears to be hallucinogenic or psychoactive. Recommend fasting before exposure." But even as I wrote, I could smell the lingering aroma of that feast, could feel the memory of flavors that had been perfect until they became corruption, and I wondered if I would ever be able to eat again without remembering the hunger that could never be filled. I spent the night upstairs, afraid to stay in the basement any longer, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection's perfect face, heard the chime of falling gold, felt the ghost touch of imagined lovers. The house had gotten inside my head, shown me parts of myself I'd spent years trying to forget or overcome. The worst part was how right some of it had been. I was proud, envious, greedy for knowledge and recognition. I did deny myself pleasures out of a misguided sense of virtue. I had poisoned friendships with my petty jealousies. The house wasn't lying to me. It was showing me truths I'd never had the courage to face. Dawn found me sitting by the kitchen window, staring out at the olive groves and wondering if I should just pack up and leave. I'd documented enough to write a basic report. I could recommend the house be sealed and demolished, could go back to my safe small life in Thessaloniki, and pretend none of this had happened. But I was an archaeologist. I didn't leave jobs half-finished, no matter how disturbing they became. And some part of me, the part that had always been drawn to dangerous places and forbidden knowledge, needed to see this through to the end. The 6th door bore the symbol of a spear and the word orge, wrath, the anger that burned everything it touched. This door was made of iron, black with age and scarred as if it had been struck by weapons. When I touched the handle, it was warm, as if fires burned on the other side. The room beyond was not what I expected. Instead of flames and fury, I found myself in my old office at the University of Athens. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The cluttered desk, the overflowing bookshelves, the window that looked out onto the courtyard where students gathered between classes. But the atmosphere was wrong, charged with tension like the air before a storm. Sitting at my desk, reading through my files, was Dr. Pavlos Metaxas, the department head who had denied me tenure 5 years ago. "Ah, Lena," he said without looking up. "I was just reviewing your publication record. Quite modest, isn't it?" The old fury rose in my chest like bile. Pavlos had been a mediocre scholar who'd achieved his position through politics and connections rather than merit. He'd stolen ideas from junior faculty, taken credit for graduate students' work, and blocked the careers of anyone who threatened his petty empire. "You know why I didn't get tenure?" I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Do I?" He looked up with that condescending smile I remembered so well. Perhaps because your work lacks the rigor we expect at this institution. Perhaps because you've never learned to work well with others. Or perhaps because you simply aren't as talented as you think you are. Each word was a carefully aimed blow, designed to hit exactly where I was most vulnerable. I felt my hands clench into fists, felt the familiar rage building in my chest, the same anger that had consumed me for months after, being denied tenure, that had driven me to write scathing letters I'd never sent and imagine elaborate revenges I'd never pursue. You destroyed my career, I said. I maintained standards, Pavlos replied, though I admit I did enjoy watching you fail. You were always so arrogant, so certain of your own brilliance. It was satisfying to bring you down to earth. The room began to change around us. My neat office became a battlefield, the walls scarred with bullet holes and scorch marks. The books on the shelves burst into flames. The window showed not the peaceful courtyard, but a wasteland where nothing grew. This is what your anger has created, Pavlos said, his form beginning to blur and shift. Look around you, Lena. See what your fury has wrought. I looked and I saw them all. Everyone who had ever wronged me, everyone I'd ever wanted to hurt. The playground bullies from childhood, the professors who dismissed my work, the colleagues who'd stolen my ideas, the lovers who'd betrayed my trust. They stood in the burning room, their faces twisted with pain and fear. And in my hand was a weapon, a bronze spear, ancient and beautiful and sharp enough to cut through bone. Take your revenge, a voice whispered, and I realized it was my own voice, echoing back from the walls. Make them pay for every slight, every insult, every moment of pain they've caused you. You have the power now. Use it. The spear felt warm in my grip, perfectly balanced, eager for blood. I could feel the justice of it, the rightness of finally striking back at everyone who had hurt me. Why should I forgive? Why should I turn the other cheek? Why should the guilty go unpunished? They deserve it, my own voice continued. All of them. They made you suffer, and now it's their turn. Think of how good it will feel to finally let go of all that anger, to release it onto the people who earned it. I raised the spear, looking at Pavlos's frightened face, and felt a moment of pure, savage joy. This was justice. This was... No, I said, lowering the weapon. This isn't justice. This is just more pain. They hurt you first. My voice shrieked from the walls. They started this. They deserve whatever you do to them. Maybe they did deserve it. Maybe every person who had ever wronged me had earned whatever punishment I could devise. But carrying that anger, nurturing it, letting it grow until it consumed everything else, that had hurt me more than any of them ever had. I won't do this, I said, dropping the spear. It clattered to the floor and dissolved into dust. I won't let my anger make me into something monstrous. The burning room began to fade. Pavlos and all the others dissolved like smoke. My own voice screamed curses and threats from the walls, but I ignored it, walking calmly to the door. You'll never have peace, my voice called after me. They'll keep hurting you, and you'll have no way to strike back. You'll die powerless and forgotten. Maybe that was true. Maybe I would spend my life being hurt by people I couldn't or wouldn't hurt in return. But I'd rather die powerless than become the kind of person who solved pain with more pain, who answered cruelty with greater cruelty. Back in the central chamber, I sat down heavily on the stone floor, 6 rooms down, 1 to go. But I wasn't sure I had the strength for whatever waited behind the 7th door. Each room had shown me a different aspect of my own darkness, had tempted me with sins that felt less like moral failings and more like natural responses to an unfair world. The house was stripping away all my defenses, all my careful constructions of who I thought I was. In my journal I wrote, Room 6 exploits feelings of righteous anger and desire for revenge. Subject experiences vivid scenarios of retribution against past tormentors. Weapon materialization suggests psychokinetic phenomena or advanced hallucination technology. Psychological impact, severe. But as I wrote, I could still feel the weight of that bronze spear in my hand, could still remember the moment of savage joy when I'd considered using it, and I wondered if walking away from that vengeance made me wise or just a coward. The 7th door was different from all the others. Where the previous 6 had been solid wood or metal, this one seemed to be made of living moss, green and soft and inviting to the touch. The symbol above it was a bed covered in the same moss, and the word carved into the stone lintel read, Acedia, sloth, but not the simple laziness most people understood. The Greeks had meant something deeper, the spiritual torpor that came from giving up on life itself. I stood before that final door for a long time, my hand on the soft moss of its surface. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually drained by everything I'd experienced in the previous rooms. The sins I'd faced weren't external temptations, but internal truths, aspects of my own nature that I'd spent my life trying to deny or overcome. What waited behind this door? What final test had the circle of Apatheia designed for their initiates? The door opened at my touch, revealing a room that was more garden than chamber. Moss covered everything, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, creating a soft green cocoon that muffled sound and seemed to absorb light. The air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of growing things and deep earth. In the center of the space was a bed made entirely of moss, so inviting that every muscle in my tired body ached to lie down on it. Sitting beside the bed was a figure I recognized but had never seen before. Myself, but older, much older. This Lena had silver hair and lines around her eyes, the marks of decades I hadn't yet lived. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally found rest after a long journey. "Hello," she said in my voice, aged and refined by years I hadn't experienced. "I've been waiting for you to arrive." "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm you at 70, she said. "Emeritus professor, published author, respected in the field. I've accomplished everything you've ever dreamed of and more. But I'm also tired, Lena, so very tired." She gestured to the moss bed. "Do you know what I've learned in all those years? Life is struggle, constant, exhausting struggle. You fight for recognition, for funding, for respect. You battle your own weaknesses and other people's cruelties. You work yourself to exhaustion trying to prove your worth to a world that doesn't care." I thought of my own struggles, the rejected grant applications, the dismissive colleagues, the constant pressure to publish or perish, the loneliness of a life devoted to work that few people understood or valued. "It doesn't get easier," older Lena continued. "If anything, it gets harder. The young scholars coming up are brilliant and hungry. Technology changes everything you thought you knew. Your body fails, your mind slows, and eventually the world moves on without you." She lay back on the moss bed, sinking into its soft embrace with a sigh of relief. "But here, in this place, you can rest. You can dream of the life you might have lived if you'd made different choices. You can experience all the love and success and happiness that reality will never give you. This is what sloth really is," she said, her voice growing drowsy. "Not laziness, surrender. The decision to stop fighting, to stop trying, to give up on the possibility that things might get better. And it feels so good, Lena, so peaceful." I watched my older self sink deeper into the moss bed, her expression growing more serene with each passing moment. She looked happier than I'd ever seen myself look, more at peace than I'd ever felt. "Come," she murmured, "lie down beside me. Dream of the life where you married Andreas, where you got the Oxford Fellowship, where your books changed the world. Dream of being loved and celebrated and remembered. Why struggle with reality when you can have perfection in dreams?" The moss bed looked incredibly inviting. I was so tired from everything I'd experienced, so worn down by the house's revelations about my own nature. What would be the harm in resting for a while, in dreaming of better things? I took a step toward the bed, then another. The moss was soft under my feet, springy and welcoming. I could feel the exhaustion in my bones, the weight of all my fears and failures pressing down on me like a physical force. "That's it," older Lena whispered. "Just rest, just dream. Let someone else worry about the world. You've done enough." But as I reached the edge of the bed, I noticed something that made me pause. My older self was beginning to fade, becoming translucent as she sank deeper into the moss. And in her fading features I saw not peace but emptiness, the hollow expression of someone who had given up not just on struggle but on life itself. "What happens if I lie down?" I asked. "You dream," she said, her voice barely audible now. "You dream the most beautiful dreams. You dream of being perfect, of being loved, of never hurting again. And you never have to wake up, never face the struggles and disappointments of reality. never risk failure or rejection or pain, but also never experience the triumph of overcoming obstacles, the joy of genuine achievement, the satisfaction of earning something through effort rather than fantasy. But what about my work? I asked. What about the discoveries I might make, the students I might teach, the history I might preserve? Someone else will do it, older Lena murmured, almost completely faded now. Someone else will always do it. Why should you have to be the one who suffers? Because that was what it meant to be alive, to suffer, to struggle, to face the possibility of failure and try anyway. The dreams this room offered might be perfect, but they weren't real. They weren't earned. They weren't mine. I backed away from the bed, even as every fiber of my being ached to lie down and surrender to its promise of eternal rest. You're making a mistake, older Lena whispered, now just a voice without form. Life will only bring you pain. At least here you could have been happy. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would live to be 70 and die exhausted and forgotten, having accomplished nothing of lasting value. Maybe I would face decades of struggle and disappointment and loneliness, but I would face them awake, alert, fully alive. I would take the risk that reality might surprise me, that the struggle might be worth it, that even failure might teach me something valuable. No, I said firmly. I won't give up. Not yet. The moss bed began to wither and decay, the green walls turning brown and crumbling. The voice of my older self faded into nothing, leaving only the whisper of dead leaves and the sound of my own breathing. I walked out of the 7th room and closed the door behind me, knowing I would never open it again. 7 rooms, 7 sins, 7 tests of who I really was, beneath all my carefully constructed defenses. And somehow, impossibly, I had passed them all. The central chamber had changed. When I'd first discovered it, the circular room had been empty except for the 7 doors and their mysterious symbols. Now, ancient Greek text covered every surface, walls, ceiling, floor, carved into the stone as if the words themselves had grown from the rock. I knelt and began to translate, my years of classical study finally serving a purpose beyond academic advancement. Know thyself, seeker, for the gods judge not by your actions but by your understanding. Each sin carries within it the seed of wisdom, each failing the promise of transcendence. To see your darkness clearly is to step toward light. The circle of Epithea hadn't been devil worshippers or psychological sadists. They'd been philosophers, using the structure of the 7 deadly sins to create a system of self-examination more thorough than anything I'd encountered in modern psychology. The rooms weren't punishments, they were mirrors, reflecting back not just our failings but our potential for growth. Pride shows us the difference between confidence and arrogance. Greed teaches us the cost of taking more than we need. Lust reminds us that desire without connection is emptiness. Envy reveals how comparison poisons joy. Gluttony demonstrates that nothing external can fill the emptiness within. Wrath shows us how anger consumes the angry. Sloth warns us that surrender masquerades as peace. I continued reading, translating as quickly as I could. The seeker who passes through all 7 chambers and emerges unchanged has learned nothing. The seeker who is destroyed by what they see was not ready for the truth. But the seeker who faces their darkness and chooses light, they have earned the wisdom of the gods. As I read the final passage, the 7 doors began to glow with soft light, not the harsh, supernatural radiance I'd expected, but something warm and golden, like sunrise over the Aegean Sea. The doors opened. From each room came a figure, not the twisted reflections and false promises I'd encountered before, but something else entirely. They looked like the classical depictions of virtues, beautiful beings in flowing robes who radiated peace and wisdom. You have seen pride, said the first figure, and chosen humility. You have seen greed, said the second, and chosen generosity. You have seen lust, said the third, and chosen love. You have seen envy, said the fourth, and chosen gratitude. You have seen gluttony, said the fifth, and chosen temperance. You have seen wrath, said the sixth, and chosen forgiveness. You have seen sloth, said the seventh, and chosen courage. They surrounded me in the center of the chamber, their presence filling me with a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. I had faced the worst parts of myself and chosen to be better. I had been tested by my own darkness and emerged not perfect, but aware. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you return to the world," they said in unison, "but you carry with you the knowledge of who you are, all of who you are, light and shadow both. You will still feel pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, but you will recognize them when they arise, and you will have the choice of what to do with them. And if I fail that choice, then you will fail," they said simply, "as all humans do. But you will fail with understanding, and understanding makes even failure a teacher." The figures began to fade, but their words lingered. "Go well, Lena Markou. You have earned the right to know yourself." I climbed the stairs from the basement for the last time as the sun was rising over the hills of Delphi. The Villa Apatheia looked different in the morning light, not the ominous ruin I'd first seen, but simply an old house with a strange story to tell. My equipment was packed, my notes complete, my photographs documented. I had enough material for several papers, maybe even a book. The Circle of Apatheia deserved to be remembered, their philosophical system preserved and studied. But the real treasure wasn't in my notes or photographs. It was in the knowledge I carried with me, the hard-won understanding of my own nature, complete with all its flaws and contradictions. When Dimitris arrived with his taxi, he took one look at me and crossed himself. "Kyria," he said, "you look different." I did feel different, not transformed into some perfect being, but more solid somehow, more present in my own skin. I had faced the 7 deadly sins and discovered they weren't external demons, but internal struggles that every human being carried. The wisdom wasn't in defeating them, but in understanding them. "The house," Dimitris said as we drove away, did it speak to you?" "Yes," I said, watching the Villa Apatheia disappear behind the olive trees. "It showed me who I am. And who are you?" I thought about that as we wound down the mountain road toward Athens. Who was I? I was someone who struggled with pride but had learned to choose humility, someone who fought envy but could practice gratitude, someone who battled anger but could choose forgiveness. I was someone who was perfectly, beautifully, terribly human. "I'm Lena Markou," I said finally, "and that's enough." Epilogue. The report. Archaeological Survey Report, Villa Apatheia, Delphi Region, Dr. Lena Markou, Principal Investigator. Date, August 15, 2002. Summary. The Villa Apatheia represents a unique example of 19th-century religious architecture designed around philosophical rather than purely devotional principles. The Circle of Apatheia appears to have developed a sophisticated system of psychological self-examination based on the classical conception of the 7 deadly sins. Recommendation: the site should be preserved as a monument of historical and philosophical significance. The basement chambers, while psychologically challenging, represent an innovative approach to self-knowledge that predates modern therapeutic techniques by over a century. Personal note: some places change us in ways we don't expect. The Villa Apatheia is one of them. I entered it as a skeptical academic looking for historical artifacts. I left it as a human being who finally understood that our flaws are not failures to be hidden but challenges to be met with wisdom and compassion. The house taught me that the 7 deadly sins are not external temptations but internal struggles. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth live in all of us. The question is not whether we will feel them. We will. The question is what we choose to do when we do. That choice, made moment by moment, day by day, is what makes us human. I have sealed the basement chambers, not to hide them, but to protect future visitors until proper psychological support systems can be established. The Circle of Apatheia created something powerful, a mirror that reflects not just our faces, but our souls. Such mirrors should be approached with care, respect, and the understanding that some truths change us forever. 6 months have passed since I left the villa. I returned to my position at the University of Thessaloniki, but I am not the same person who left. I notice my pride when it rises and choose humility instead. I feel envy toward my colleagues' successes and practice gratitude for my own opportunities. I recognize anger when it builds and choose forgiveness over revenge. I am not perfect. I still fail these tests regularly. But now I fail with awareness, and awareness makes all the difference. Last week I received a letter from Andreas. He had read my published paper on the Villa Apatheia and wanted to congratulate me on the work. It sounds like you discovered something important, he wrote, not just historically, but personally. He was right. I had discovered myself, all of myself, light and shadow together, and for the first time in my life that felt like enough. The circle of apatheia understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp, that wisdom comes not from perfection but from honest self-examination. They built their house not to punish sin but to illuminate it, to transform it from unconscious compulsion into conscious choice. Their work deserves to be remembered, studied, and carefully, very carefully, experienced. After all, as the inscription above their door read, "Know thyself," it remains the most challenging and necessary task any human being can undertake. End report. Final note, the house today. The Villa Apatheia still stands on its hillside outside Delphi, now protected as a historical monument. The basement chambers remain sealed, available only to researchers with proper psychological support and preparation. Visitors report that the house feels different now, not threatening, but contemplative, as if it accomplished what it was built to do and now rests in satisfied silence. The locals still cross themselves when they pass it, but they also nod respectfully, as one does to a teacher who gives difficult but necessary lessons. Some houses are haunted by ghosts. The Villa Apatheia is haunted by truth, and perhaps that is the most terrifying ghost of all. In memory of the circle of apatheia who dared to ask, what if we faced ourselves completely, and built a house where that question could be answered. Approximately, end approximately. Author's note on historical accuracy. While the Villa Apatheia and the Circle of Apatheia are fictional, they are based on real historical precedents. The 19th century saw numerous esoteric societies throughout Europe that blended classical philosophy, psychology, and mysticism. Groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Theosophical Society, and various Rosicrucian orders all sought to use ancient wisdom traditions for personal transformation. The Greek concept of the 7 deadly sins predates Christianity, rooted in Aristotelian ethics and Stoic philosophy. The words used in the story, hybris, plenexia, epithymia, thonos, gastromargia, orgia, and acedia, are authentic ancient Greek terms for these psychological states. The location near Delphi is particularly appropriate, as this was the site of the ancient oracle where seekers came to hear the command "Know thyself," the same goal pursued by Lena in the House of Divine Errors.